Picture this, a warm summer evening, the kind where the air feels thick with possibility. You're sitting on a weathered porch swing, creaking gently as it sways. Across from you is your 90-year-old grandmother, her eyes twinkling with a lifetime of experiences. She leans in, takes your hand, and says, "My dear, if I could go back and tell my younger self what I know now." That's the conversation we're about to have, you and I. I'm not your grandmother, but consider me a friend who's walked a few more miles on this journey called life. And today, I'm here to share some nuggets of wisdom that I wish someone had whispered in my ear when I was just starting out. Now, before we dive in, I want you to know something important. This isn't a lecture. It's not a list of do's and don'ts. It's a heart-to-heart from one human being to another. Because here's the truth, we're all figuring this out as we go along. But if we can learn from each other's experiences, maybe we can make this journey a little smoother, a little richer, and a whole lot more meaningful. So, let's start with a lesson that took me far too long to learn. The power of embracing imperfection. I remember being in my early 20s, fresh out of college, and feeling like I had have it all figured out. My friend Sarah and I would spend hours agonizing over our career paths, our relationships, even the way we dressed. We were so caught up in presenting a perfect image to the world that we forgot to actually live. It wasn't until I met my mentor, Dr. Elaine Chen, that I started to see things differently. Elaine was this brilliant scientist who had patents to her name and had won countless awards. But what struck me most about her wasn't her achievements, it was her ability to laugh at herself. One day, I was helping her prepare for a big presentation. She spilled coffee all over her white shirt just minutes before she was due on stage. Instead of panicking, she looked at me, grinned, and said, "Well, looks like I'm giving this talk in my lucky polka dot shirt." She threw on a cardigan and walked out there with confidence. That moment was a revelation. Here was this incredibly accomplished woman, completely unfazed by a mishap that would have sent me into a tailspin. It made me realize that true confidence doesn't come from being perfect, it comes from being okay with your imperfections. From that day on, I started to embrace my own flaws. I learned that making mistakes doesn't make you a failure, it makes you human. And there's immense freedom in that realization. When you stop trying to be perfect, you start being authentic. And authenticity, that's where the real magic happens. Now, let's talk about something that goes hand in hand with embracing imperfection, the courage to be vulnerable. For years, I thought vulnerability was a weakness. I built walls around my heart, thinking they would protect me from getting hurt. But all they did was keep me isolated and prevent me from forming deep, meaningful connections. It wasn't until I met Jack, an elderly neighbor of mine, that I understood the true power of vulnerability. Jack had lost his wife of 50 years, and I expected him to be closed off, bitter even. But he surprised me. He spoke openly about his grief, his fears, and his struggles to find purpose again. One day, as we were tending to his garden, he said something I'll never forget. "You know, kiddo, the pain of loss is the price we pay for love, and it's worth every penny." Jack's openness touched something deep within me. I saw how his willingness to be vulnerable allowed others to connect with him on a profound level. People were drawn to his authenticity, and in sharing his pain, he found inspired by Jack, I started to lower my own walls. I began to share my fears, my doubts, and my struggles with those close to me. And you know what? Instead of pushing people away, it brought them closer. I formed deeper friendships, more authentic relationships, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Being vulnerable isn't easy. It takes courage to show your true self to the world. But the connections you form, the understanding you gain, and the freedom you feel, they're worth the risk. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that's become increasingly important in our fast-paced world. The art of being present. We live in an age of constant distraction. Smartphones, social media, endless to-do lists, they all compete for our attention. And in the midst of it all, we often forget to simply be where we are. I learned this lesson the hard way. I was always planning for the future, always thinking about the next big thing. I was so focused on where I was going that I forgot to appreciate where I was. It took a chance encounter with a stranger to shake me out of this mindset. I was rushing through a park one day, lost in thought about an upcoming presentation, when I quite literally ran into an old man feeding pigeons. Instead of being annoyed, he smiled and invited me to join him. His name was Harold, and he had the most serene presence I'd ever encountered. As we sat there, tossing breadcrumbs to the birds, he shared his philosophy on life. "You see these pigeons," he said. "They're not worried about yesterday or tomorrow. They're just here, enjoying this moment. That's the secret to a happy life." Harold went on to tell me about his own journey. He had been a high-powered executive, always chasing the next big deal. It wasn't until he retired that he realized how much of life he had missed by always focusing on the future. "The present is a gift," he said. "That's why they call it the present. Don't be so busy opening tomorrow's gift that you forget to enjoy today's." Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. I realized how much of my life I had spent either dwelling on the past or anxiously anticipating the future. I was missing the beauty of the present moment. From that day on, I made a conscious effort to be more present. I started practicing mindfulness, taking time each day to simply observe my surroundings without judgment. I began to appreciate the small things, the warmth of the sun on my face, the taste of my morning coffee, the sound of laughter. And you know what? My life became richer, more vibrant. I found joy in places I had overlooked before. My relationships deepened because I was truly there, truly listening when I was with others. Being present doesn't mean you stop planning for the future. It means you stop letting the future rob you of the present. It means finding balance, appreciating where you are while still moving forward. Now, let's talk about something that ties into being present, the importance of gratitude. For a long time, I was caught in the trap of always wanting more. More success, more money, more stuff. I thought happiness was always just around the corner, waiting for me to achieve that next big goal. But then I met Maria, a refugee who had fled her war-torn country with nothing but the clothes on her back. Despite the hardships she had faced, Maria was one of the most joyful people I'd ever met. One day I asked her how she managed to stay so positive. Her answer changed my perspective forever. "Every morning," she said, "I wake up and think of 3 things I'm grateful for. Some days it's big things like my family's safety. Other days it's as simple as the taste of fresh bread. But there's always something to be thankful for." But Maria's words made me realize how much I had been taking for granted. I had been so focused on what I didn't have that I had forgotten to appreciate what I did have. Inspired by Maria, I started my own gratitude practice. Every night before bed, I would write down 3 things I was thankful for. At first, it felt a bit forced, but as I continued, I began to notice more and more things to be grateful for throughout my day. This simple practice had a profound effect on my happiness. I started to find joy in the little things, a kind word from a stranger, a beautiful sunset, a warm cup of tea on a cold day. My perspective shifted from what was lacking in my life to the abundance that was already there. Gratitude doesn't mean ignoring the challenges in life. It means finding the good even in difficult situations. It means recognizing that even on your worst days, there are still things to be thankful for. And here's the beautiful thing about gratitude: it grows. The more you practice it, the more natural it becomes. And as your gratitude grows, so does your happiness. Now, let's talk about something that many of us struggle with: the art of forgiveness. For years, I carried around anger and resentment like heavy weights. I thought holding onto these negative emotions somehow protected me or punished those who had wronged me. But in reality, the only person I was hurting was myself. It wasn't until I met Father Thomas, a wise old priest with kind eyes and a gentle smile, that I began to understand the true power of forgiveness. I had gone to him, bitter about a betrayal by a close friend. I expected him to validate my anger, to tell me I was right to hold on to my resentment. Instead, he shared a story that changed everything. There were 2 monks, he began, walking along a muddy road. They came upon a beautiful young woman in a silk kimono, unable to cross a large puddle without ruining her clothes. The older monk picked her up and carried her across. The younger monk was scandalized but said nothing. 5 hours later, as they neared their monastery, the younger monk couldn't contain himself any longer. "How could you carry that woman?" he blurted out. "We're not supposed to touch women?" The older monk looked puzzled. "Brother," he said, "I set her down hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" Father Thomas looked at me with compassion. "Forgiveness," he said, is not about condoning what happened. It's about setting down your burden so you can move forward. Those words struck a chord deep within me. I realized that by holding on to my anger, I wasn't hurting the person who had wronged me. I was only hurting myself, carrying a weight that was holding me back from peace and happiness. Forgiveness, I learned, is a gift you give yourself. It's about freeing yourself from the prison of resentment and bitterness. It's about choosing peace over anger, understanding over judgment. This doesn't mean forgiveness is easy. It's a process, often a challenging one. But it's a process that leads to healing and freedom. I started small, forgiving minor slights and misunderstandings. As I practiced, I found the strength to forgive bigger hurts. And with each act of forgiveness, I felt lighter, freer. Remember, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing harmful behavior. It doesn't mean you have to reconcile with someone who has hurt you. It simply means letting go of the anger and resentment that's weighing you down. Now, as we near the end of our conversation, I want to talk about something that ties all these lessons together: the importance of self-love and self-compassion. For much of my life, I was my own harshest critic. I would berate myself for every mistake, every perceived failure. I thought this self-criticism would drive me to be better, but all it did was leave me feeling drained and unworthy. It wasn't until I met Sophia, a life coach in her 70s, that I began to understand the transformative power of self-compassion. Sophia had this radiant energy about her, a quiet confidence that drew people in. When I confided in her about my struggles with self-criticism, she said something that stopped me in my tracks. "Darling, would you speak to your best friend the way you speak to yourself?" That question hit me like a lightning bolt. Of course I wouldn't. I would never dream of being so harsh with someone I cared about. So why was I doing it to myself? Sophia taught me that self-compassion isn't self-indulgence. It's not about making excuses for bad behavior or shirking responsibility. It's about treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer a good friend. She introduced me to a simple practice. Whenever I caught myself in negative self-talk, I would pause and ask, what would I say to a friend in this situation? Then I would direct those compassionate words to myself. At first, it felt awkward, even a bit silly. But as I continued to practice, I noticed a shift. I became more resilient in the face of setbacks. I was able to learn from my mistakes without beating myself up. And perhaps most importantly, I started to genuinely like myself. This self-compassion had a ripple effect on every aspect of my life. When I was kinder to myself, I found I had more kindness to offer others. My relationships improved, my work became more fulfilling, and I felt a sense of peace I'd never experienced before. Remember, you are worthy of love and compassion, not because of what you achieve or how you look, but simply because you exist. You are a unique, valuable human being, deserving of kindness, especially from yourself. As we come to the close of our conversation, I want to leave you with this thought. Life is a journey of continuous learning and growth. The lessons we've talked about today: embracing imperfection, being vulnerable, staying present, practicing gratitude, forgiving, and showing self-compassion, these aren't destinations you reach once and for all. They're practices, skills that we continue to develop throughout our lives. There will be days when you struggle, when you fall back into old patterns, and that's okay. Remember, progress isn't about perfection. It's about consistently making the effort to grow, to learn, to become a little bit better each day. So I invite you to take these lessons and make them your own. Experiment with them. See how they fit into your life. Be patient with yourself as you learn and grow. And above all, remember that you are on your own unique journey. Your path doesn't have to look like anyone else's. As you go forward from here, I hope you'll carry these words with you. You are stronger than you know, more resilient than you believe, and more loved than you can imagine. Trust in your own wisdom. Be kind to yourself and never stop growing. Thank you for sharing this time with me. May your journey be filled with joy, growth, and beautiful discoveries. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, the best is yet to come.